All right, let's dive in. Today we're going way back to the early days of Islam to learn about this woman, Nusaybah bint Ka'ab,
Um, Amara.
Amara, better known as that. She's like famous for being this incredibly courageous and dedicated woman. But I think with your help, we can kind of dig deeper, like what really made her so remarkable.
Yeah, I do too.
We've got Dr. Amar Suleiman's lecture to guide us, and it's like full of amazing
Oh,
detail.
good choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Suleiman's great. Really good at bringing out the human side of history.
Yeah.
And with Nusaybah, oh, there's a lot to uncover. It's not like she's some figure from a long time ago. She was right there in those key moments, really shaping things through what she did.
Okay, so background first. She was from the Banu Najjar tribe, and they were connected to the Prophet Muhammad in some way, right?
Yes, they were maternal relatives. Being so close to the Prophet probably made their acceptance of Islam even more important to the early Muslims.
Right.
But here's the thing about Nusaybah. She didn't just kind of go with the flow. When she heard what the Prophet was saying, she went all the way to Mecca just to pledge her loyalty to him.
And get this, she brought her sons, Habib and Abdullah, too. Like, that's a detail that's always stuck with me. From the very beginning, her faith was all about her family.
It really foreshadows the commitment, like the incredible commitment her whole family would make. You have to think, back then, travel was hard.
Oh, yeah?
And for a woman to take that journey with her kids shows you how strong her belief was.
She wasn't just like accepting a new religion, it was more like actively choosing it, building her whole life and her sons' lives around it.
Exactly.
Powerful.
And now, you can't talk about Nusaybah without talking about Uhud. It was a turning point for early Muslims and where her story, well, it becomes amazing, honestly.
Yeah, and Dr. Suleiman doesn't sugarcoat it. The Muslims were outnumbered, and then to make things worse, some of their own guys, the hypocrites as he calls them, just left right before the fighting started.
Yeah, and that word hypocrites, it's important. It means people who acted like Muslims but didn't really believe.
Ah.
They abandoning everyone at Uhud, it was a big blow. Added to the chaos and fear, like Dr. Suleiman describes.
So total chaos, people running away, but not Nusaybah. She was there to help with the wounded, but when things went bad, she just dropped her supplies and picked up a sword and shield.
It wasn't just like a crazy thing, though. The Prophet himself said later that she was a good fighter, even compared to experienced warriors. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it changes the picture, right? It wasn't just this like blind rage thing. She knew how to fight, wasn't just swinging a sword randomly.
Yeah, that detail gets missed a lot. Makes her courage even deeper, don't you think?
Definitely.
It wasn't just heart, but skill, making a choice to fight, even though it was dangerous.
Then there's this like incredibly sad but powerful story about her son Abdullah. He got hurt, and instead of freaking out, she bandaged him up,
Yeah.
told him to keep fighting, and then went straight back into the battle herself.
What's even wilder is, later, she found the guy who hurt Abdullah
No way.
and, like Dr. Suleiman says, got revenge.
Mm.
Like, fierce, like a mother protecting her child.
That's, yeah, hard to forget that. Shows you how intense everything was, what was at stake, and what she was willing to do.
And it wasn't just her out there, right? Her husband and both her sons were fighting too, bravely. It makes you wonder, was having her family there a strength, or was it an even bigger burden, do you think?
I see both sides. I mean, on one hand, having them there fighting alongside you, that must have been powerful. But knowing they could get killed, that must have been awful.
For sure. It's complicated, her experience. She's a fighter, but also a mom, a wife, all these things at the same time.
And this is when we get the super moving scene. The prophet, seeing how brave they all were, he prays that they'll be together in paradise. And Nusaybah's response is so powerful. I don't care what happens to me in this journey after this.
She was totally accepting God's will. Like, she knew this life was temporary compared to eternity. That statement really shows her unwavering faith.
Uhud was huge, obviously, but she didn't stop there. She fought in so many other battles. Khandak, Hunain, even Yamama and Yarmouk later. Always on the battlefield, a real warrior. But there's something else about her that I find super interesting, too.
You're thinking about her question about the rewards in the Quran.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Dr. Suleiman mentions it. She asked why women weren't specifically mentioned in those verses. It seems small, but to me it says a lot about who she was.
It does make you rethink the idea of her just as a warrior,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't just on the battlefield that she was brave. Asking about those verses, it shows she was smart and not afraid to question things. How important do you think that was?
Really important, I think. She was bold, willing to discuss her faith, even with religious leaders. And it's amazing her question actually led to a new verse in the Quran, one that specifically said women deserve rewards too.
Wow, think about her impact, right? She wasn't just defending the Muslim community, she was shaping how they understood and practiced their faith. And that brings us to someone else super important in Nusaybah's life and in early Islam, Musaylima, the false prophet.
Right, and Dr. Suleiman really stresses how dangerous Musaylima was. He was like a direct challenge to the prophet, attracting people with lies and being really brutal to gain power, everything the prophet was against.
He was a real test of the early Muslims. And for Nusaybah, it became very personal, tragically so.
Because her son, Habib, he was sent to talk to Musaylima and was captured and executed brutally. Dr. Suleiman's description is just awful. Habib wouldn't reject his belief in Prophet Muhammad, so Musaylima, just to show his power, he had Habib cut apart while he was still alive.
Just imagine how Nusaybah must have felt hearing that. To lose her son so horribly to someone claiming to be a prophet, it's like the ultimate test of faith.
But she didn't break. Instead, she swore she'd get revenge on Musaylima if she lived long enough. And it wasn't just about her son anymore. It was about defending her faith, her whole community from this dangerous threat.
It shows she knew what was really at stake. If Musaylima won, it would destroy everything the prophet had worked for. It wasn't just about her son, but about the survival of all Muslims.
It's amazing, how her life just keeps intersecting with these big moments in early Islam. But you made a good point. It wasn't just like blind faith. She was thinking, questioning things, being strategic, even getting revenge.
Right. And think about it. This was a time when women, well, their roles were pretty limited. And here's Nusaybah, not just fighting, but good at it. Even the prophet praised her skill. It, makes you think, right?
It does. It makes me wonder, maybe her story, while incredible, is part of something bigger. Were there other women who did amazing things, but we just don't know because their stories weren't recorded?
Oh, for sure, probably. Maybe Nusaybah's story is well known because of her family being close to the prophet, so people wrote about her. But think of all the women who converted, who supported everyone, maybe even fought, that we'll never know about.
It adds to her legacy, right? She's not just an individual, but maybe representing all those women whose stories we've lost.
Yeah, whose strength and faith were probably just as important for those early Muslims to survive. Going back to Uhud for a sec, Dr. Suleiman really focuses on how important family was for Nusaybah.
Yeah, it's a constant theme, isn't it? Converting with her sons, her husband and sons fighting with her, the prophet praying for them to be together in paradise. Do you think that family bond made her stronger? Or did it make things harder, having them all at risk?
Probably both. Imagine bringing your sons into this new religion, one that was already being attacked, and then to have them all beside you in battle, facing death. It's hard to imagine that level of, shared belief.
And losing Habib, I can't even fathom it. But she doesn't fall apart. She turns that grief into this vow to get revenge. It's like her faith and her love for family, they're both fueling her fight against Musaylima.
Which, again, goes back to the bigger picture. It wasn't just personal, Musaylima. He was a threat to everyone, to the prophet's message, everything they'd fought for. Nusaybah understood that.
And that makes her questioning those verses about rewards even more interesting. She's this fierce warrior, but she's also thinking deeply about, the theology of it all.
And it wasn't just her wondering, right? She challenged how people understood it, and that led to a new revelation, making it clear that women are included in those rewards. It's intellectual courage, to engage with her faith that deeply, to fight for what she thought was right.
Okay, so we've talked about Uhud, but she goes on to fight in tons of other battles. What about those? Was it like a pattern, or does it more about whatever was happening at the time?
Good question. It's easy to see her, as always, on the front lines. But these battles, they were over years, decades even. At Uhud, she's, maybe in her 30s or 40s. Her sons are young. But by the time she faces Musaylima at Yamama, she's in her 60s.
Whoa, I didn't think about it like that. It's not just one moment of bravery. It's her whole life, putting herself on the line again and again for what she believed in.
Exactly, and that's what's so amazing about her. Not just one act, but choices made over and over, even as she got older, even after losing people she loved, even as the threats changed.
What about her physically? We know she lost an arm at Yamama, but Dr. Suleiman says she fought at Yarmouk after that, with one hand. How is that even possible?
It shows how strong she was, physically and mentally. But it also makes you think, what was fighting like back then? Maybe it wasn't all about brute strength. Maybe there were other roles where her experience and just, determination were valuable.
Yeah, That makes sense. And like you said before, maybe we shouldn't think of her fighting as always this crazy, uncontrolled thing. It was probably more skillful, knowing how to fight effectively in each situation.
And it challenges how we think about disability now. Losing an arm then, that was a huge thing. But it didn't mean someone was useless. Her still fighting, it shows how she adapted, how she wouldn't let her injury define her.
It's like this spirit of, I'll find a way to contribute no matter what. Pretty powerful, especially when we think about our own lives, our own challenges.
Absolutely. It reminds us that limits don't have to be the end. We can still find ways to do things to make a difference, even when things are hard. And speaking of making a difference, we got to talk about how Caliph Umar recognized her.
You mean that story where Umar got this expensive gift and right away decided to give it to Nusaybah, saying she deserved it most in the whole community?
That's the one. It tells you so much. She was respected, not just for fighting, but for living out what early Islam was all about. It said something about her character, her generosity, her commitment to everyone.
It also shows that people saw what she did back then, not just us looking back now. She was a legend while she was alive, someone who inspired people.
That's what makes her story so great. It's not just history. It's about these qualities that last.
Mhm.
Courage, faith, service. They can still inspire us today.
It makes me think about her later years. After all those battles, the losses, the victories, how do you think she looked back on it all? Was she at peace? Did she feel like she'd done what she was meant to do?
We can only guess, really, but I'd imagine she felt some satisfaction knowing she'd stayed true to what she believed in, that she defended her faith and her people, that she'd raised sons who believed the same things.
And who ended up fulfilling her vow against Musaylima, bringing that whole chapter to an end. It's almost like a tragedy from a play, how it all comes full circle.
It is, and it shows the power of family, of leaving a legacy, how what we do can affect people for generations.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot. Sebah's courage, her faith, her family, how she influenced those early Muslims. As we finish this deep dive, what stands out most to you about her? What's the one thing you hope listeners will take away?
Oh, man. It's hard to pick just one. I think what makes her story so interesting is that, well, she's complicated. Not easy to put in a box.
Right.
She's a warrior, sure, but also a mom, a thinker, someone who, really engaged with her faith in all these ways.
Yeah, we've talked about that, but I keep wondering what made her who she was. Was it just her personality or was it the time she lived in, all that was happening around her?
It's a great question. Dr. Silliman doesn't really say, but he gives us a lot to think about. Right from the start, she's taking charge. Going to Mecca, bringing her sons, later questioning how people understand the Quran. That shows she was independent, wanting to make her own path.
But you can't ignore what was going on in the world, right? Those early Muslims, they were in danger. Her family being close to the Prophet, that probably put them in even more danger, made them have to commit even more.
Exactly. It's like she was right in the middle of this big historical change, and it shaped her choices. She wasn't just making decisions on her own. She was reacting to challenges, opportunities, tragedies, all in this crazy time of change for society and religion.
Dr. Suleiman keeps talking about how important her faith was. Seems like that's what kept her going through all the hard stuff.
For sure. And it wasn't just like a quiet faith, it was active. She questioned things, debated, took action. Her understanding of Islam shaped her actions, and her actions shaped how she understood Islam.
That's something we forget sometimes, talking about people from history. We make them simple, like they only had one big quality. But Nusaybah, it's all those parts of her, the fighter, the mom, the believer, the intellectual, that make her story so fascinating.
And relevant today. We live in a world that wants us to pick one thing, one identity. But she shows us we can be complex, have lots of sides, and still live a life with purpose and meaning.
So as we wrap up, what are some things you hope people listening will think about?
I think her story makes us think about courage differently. It's not just about fighting. It's about having the guts to question things, to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's tough.
And to accept complexity in ourselves and in the world, to see that people and events, they're not simple, they're multi-layered.
And lastly, to remember that what we do can change things, even in ways we don't realize. We can affect history.
Nusaybah's life really proves that. Thanks for guiding us through this. It's been eye-opening. And to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep digging into those stories that matter.